It should tell you. Everyone can click on that.
Yeah.
And you should be live.
Awesome. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining us here this afternoon. I'm going to do a quick intro of myself. I am Dr. Jessie Menzel. I am our Senior Director of Clinical Training here at Equip, and I am a clinical psychologist by background. And I am so happy to be joined here today by the lovely Dr. Lara Hill. And Lara, I'm going to let you introduce yourself to everyone.
Hello, I'm Dr. Lara Hill, and I'm a psychologist as well, and have been developing with my colleagues there at the University of California, San Diego, Christina Waringa and Stephanie Natz-Peck, a new treatment approach that I get to talk with Jessie about.
I'm super excited to be doing this today. So we're going to be talking about Dr. Hill's new manual for temperament-based treatment with supports for anorexia nervosa. And I'm so excited about this because I first met Lara when I was working at UC San Diego. And I feel like I've really been able to kind of watch this whole treatment from sort of like its conception, throughout its whole course of development. And of course, it's just really special for me to be doing this here with you today, having seen that all. And my dear, dear friends, Dr. Natz and Dr. Waringa, who are also part of this treatment, is just a really wonderful capstone to all the work you all have been doing over the past many, many years. So I would love to start today by I'd like to tell you a little bit about where the inspiration for this treatment came from.
Well, when my first patient with anorexia nervosa was in 1979, Jessie, and I was directing a counseling center at a university, and we were seeing more and more students that were having eating problems, and the treatment team and I were showing outcomes that were failing abysmally. We were not making any progress in helping these students. So I started taking notes. At that point, I had my master's degree, and I started taking notes on what could be these eating issues about. Could it be family related? Could it be adjustment related? Could it be brain related, biological, social pressures? Because back in the 70s, those pressures were just starting up. So I had all these files and questions, and I went and started interviewing for my doctorate because I decided everybody must know the answers to this but me. So I went and started interviewing at the two major universities in the state where I was, and said, what degree do I need to answer these questions? Because if anything, I can't stand for the fact that I'm failing so miserably in treating these issues that seem so upfront. It's about eating. And so they put together they said, well, you need this course, well, you need a doctorate in psychology, counseling, and clinical psychology. Okay, so I got my degree, wrote my thesis in this, and developing, that's when literally, you may know, it was 1980 that the diagnosis became a reality in the DSM. And so I started my doctorate right after that, and literally was researching how the prevalence was changing as the criteria were changing between DSM-3 and 3R, and then looked at a very short-term cognitive behavioral therapy and realized what it might take to help those with bulimia. But over the years, and I just assumed I'd move off into other areas, but the challenge and the interest and my traits, I have a very stubborn trait and a very determined trait. And I just kept thinking, there's got to be something more. And so in the 90s, I was directing the National Eating Disorders Organization. We actually set up the academy, worked with, there were about 15 of us that came together, and we set up the Academy for Eating Disorders. all trying to bring the research together, all trying to understand and comprehend eating disorders. I got to grow up with the many researchers in the field. But it wasn't until Dr. Walter Kay at the University of California, San Diego, and his vision and his research in looking at the brain until he started moving forward in that realm. And as technology got better in the early 2000s, after the gene was sequenced in 2000 and the technology could start looking at the functional magnetic resonance images and seeing what was going on in different circuits of the brain, not until that did we begin to see the illness from the inside out. Because up until then, from the time it was first established in 1980, it would be like the branches of a tree. We could only see what we could see from the outside. So we were treating the symptoms, which were like the branches, but we had no idea what was going on underneath until the early 2000s. And I think Walt's or Dr. Kay's really cornerstone article on new insights in anorexia, and that publication in 2009 that came out and looked at anorexia and common circuits that were consistently showing to fire abnormally, that were triggering some of the very symptoms that we were trying to treat. Well, I knew when I read that article, it was saying something absolutely important. And then I read it again. And I hadn't had neurobiology for many years. And so I was working to update myself. And then I was trying to understand what he was saying. And the way I think, Jesse, is I mow my lawn, I'm pushing my mower and I'm thinking, so I'd stop the mower, run over and fix, write out something else, start drawing the brain. Then I'd mow some more. And then I was thinking, and by the end of the summer, I was rearranging all the lawn furniture in areas of the brain, figuring out what was not firing, what was firing. And then it suddenly came together for me. And I went, and once I pulled it together from what he was saying, I went and started expressing and sharing the insight with one client, then another client, then another client. And each client that I shared the neurobiological findings with literally burst out in tears. I'm not exaggerating, every one of them. And every one of them said, Dr. Hill, you have finally described what's going on inside. And I didn't know how to do that. And I said, I didn't know how to describe it until I'm reading this article. And so tell me how it relates with you. And so from then on, Dr. Kay and I started working together, and I would try to help the clients. I would begin to interpret what he was saying to the clients. And then in our partial group experience, I would try to show them what was happening. And so I started creating these interactive, playful games that were reenacting the brain function of those who don't have eating disorders compared to those who do. And then I would travel out to UC San Diego from Ohio and literally meet with the research team and all of you that were working there and test out the ideas and the interactive activities and have the research team critique it from the research perspective. And then I would come back, and the clients, the adult clients, were literally the ones that would help me shape it. I would say, okay, let's try on this game. If it doesn't make any sense, we're scrapping it. If it makes sense, how do each of you relate with it? And then they would say, well, add noise here, do this, and you've got it down. So then I kept refining each and every tool, getting them critiqued by the UC San Diego research team, coming back, having the clients critique it. And then what I found so amazing is that when the adult clients or those in their 30s, 40s, 50s who were saying, Dr. Hill, now that we've refined these tools, we want our families, we want our friends, we want our colleagues, our support people to begin to understand. So can we invite them in? So it was these adult clients who were asking to have the supports included so that the supports could understand what's going on in the inside from the brain perspective of this illness. And so we started inviting them in, and then the clients, I would say, how do you want me to refer to these people? Because they're spouses, they're neighbors, and I said, the research calls them carers or caregivers, and they said, no, we don't want to be taken care of. We want to be supported. And I said, okay, we'll call them supports. And so anybody that offered support could become a support person. And literally, that's the adult clients would invite. We even had bosses from work come in and sit in. We had spouses, we had partners, we had friends, we had neighbors, we had religious leaders of the that were close to the clients. The clients invited them in, and then we all worked together and used TBTS treatment to help them try it on.
That is, I really love hearing you talk about that process. And there are so many things, first of all, that I want to highlight. First of all, I think it's beautiful that this is a treatment that has been truly built in a dynamic, collaborative way, right? We have input from some of the most brilliant research minds in the field. We've got input from some of the most talented clinicians I've ever worked with. And we've got input from the people who are living this disorder every day themselves. And it's their voices that you can see so strongly in this treatment, which I think is really, really beautiful and wonderful.
Thank you, Jesse.
I want to talk about, I want to kind of like dial things back a little bit. And I'm wondering if you can define, what temperament-based means. Like, what do we mean when we have this treatment built on temperament?
I'm glad you asked that, Jesse, because traditionally through the 80s, the 90s, early 2000s, we've and behavioral health, the DSM literally focuses on symptoms. That's how we've always looked at things, from the outside in. By looking at them from the inside out, because we now are able, since the 2009 forward, we're looking at the neurobiological aspect, the nature side of the nurture. So when you think of nature and nurture, you're thinking of biology, the biological aspects, and nurture being the environment. So when you think of temperament, temperament is the biological side of personality. So Cloninger's model is, if you're looking at personality, one part of personality is temperament, the biological, and one part is character, which is the environmentally shaped part. So between our temperament and our character, we establish our personality. But what we also know from the amazing work that Cindy Bulick has been leading through the last couple decades of the genetic information around anorexia nervosa, and all the international researchers that work with her, we now know that the genetic code that is established at conception of birth literally begins to, the research shows that the brain literally starts structuring itself around that genetic code. So personality or temperament gets wired in to the point that our traits, which make up our temperament, our traits literally are forming and are already starting to be circuited and networked in our brain right up through birth and then moving forward. So people, for example, who have had more than one child or have twins, they'll say, they're as different as night and day. And that's because of temperament. That's because the genetic code came to different kinds of traits, and those traits became wired to establish that. And then how that wiring gets shaped as the child begins to grow and then moves into adolescence and moves into young adult and on, and those traits begin to take on more and more power, as Kevin Mitchell talks about in his book Innate. The amazing thing is that temperament and those innate features take in more and more of the basis of who we are, and we shape them early on, and then we lean back and rely on those tendencies. And so what we know is that you have great ability to shape one's temperament and the tendencies and the traits that they have developed, inherited during childhood. But at adolescence, when puberty hits, we find that the genes move to a whole new level of power and influence, and shaping continues through adolescence, absolutely. But the genes take on more influence, even over the environmental influence. So if we are not looking at temperament, which ends up being the roots of the tree and the symptoms being the branches, then temperament has been left out. And we're saying, now that we know about the roots and we know the way the roots are growing and what is working and what is not working, we need to balance treatment by filling in this huge gap that has not been there. So we're not advocating temperament-based therapy with support to be a standalone treatment. We're seeing it as an augmenting to the cognitive behavioral family therapy, to the dialectical behavioral therapies. We're seeing it as work with those traits, develop those traits, and then they influence the symptoms. So the symptoms may even diminish as we're looking at treating to the traits.
Yeah, one of the things that I remember I learned from Dr. K that really kind of shaped how I viewed anorexia and other eating disorders is this idea that eating disorders, especially anorexia, are born out of good traits gone bad, right? So this idea that we have these traits and it's sort of like they can go one way or they can go another way. I think sometimes when we talk about eating disorders being brain-based disorders, people walk away with almost this sort of like fatalistic feeling. Well, if it's in the brain, then there's nothing we can do about it. But it's not true. I love the idea of a tree, right? Like the root system and the kind of genetic code, everything that drives the tree to do what it does, it's only part of the story, because then when it gets above ground, you can shape it to go in a whole bunch of different directions. And that's kind of the philosophy, right, behind temperament-based treatment, is that we take these good traits that have been kind of harnessed to fuel an eating disorder and we reshape them in a different way. Is that kind of the gist?
Jesse, I don't think I could have said it better. That is the gist. And in fact, what we, Christina, Stephanie, and I did is we developed a temperament or specifically a trait profile checklist. And we took the major traits across all diagnoses, and we listed them. And the clients then just go down and check which traits are theirs. And then we've placed them on a continuum from destructive to productive, and saying, how is this trait expressing itself right now in your life? And in like an impulsive trait might be impulsively triggering that binge or that purge. Or that determined trait is actually helping the client literally hunker down and force themselves to try to circumvent that impulsive urge and move forward into another activity. So utilizing and helping them realize their own trait profile becomes the very basis of their own sense of who they are, as well as the potential of who they are. And you become the best of who you are or the worst based on how those traits are expressing themselves. And you're absolutely right in the sense that you can take a trait that has been, as Walt said, has gone bad, and start reshaping it, and it becomes a very potentially productive expression. What I think has become blurred for so many clinicians is that because we treat to symptoms traditionally, they blur traits with symptoms, and they're thinking that impulsivity needs to go away, and just like purging needs to go away. Well, symptoms can be removed, traits cannot. So the more we're helping clients and other therapists understand that if we're treating to the trait, we may say, all right, that symptom can go away, but this trait that has been influencing it can now be rerouted and maybe be utilized in a way that is true to you, but much more productive. Let's say the inhibited trait or the avoidant trait. You may be avoiding food, but now you're maybe moving towards, now I'm really working at utilizing my trait to avoid my overspending. And I can easily hold back on overspending. And I'm learning how to step forward with my determination to go ahead and force myself to not avoid this food or that food. So I can work and manage and create my own algorithm of trait expression as I'm beginning to help shape myself and help my supports realize what helps if they would help me in shaping these trait expressions, especially during adolescence.
Yeah, I like that. It's like, I like how you said we've got to understand what we're working with. We have to
Yes.
understand where this is coming from, because that's not the part that's going away.
That's
So,
exactly
we can,
it.
right? We can remove this, or we can kind of like block this off, but then that trait has to do something, like those tendencies have to do something. And yes, I think understanding how those traits work and the degree to which they're present in our patients, our loved ones, can really help give us some important tools and strategies for how to begin to make forward progress with the eating disorder.
Without a doubt. And we've created worksheets that are both in the book and now on our training, which is TBTS Training Institute. And we've created worksheets in the training level 1 so that they take that trait profile, and then they're working with their support people and with the sorting through themselves. Take 2 to 3 of your productive traits, a couple of your destructive traits, and now let's work on how I can use my productive ones to help reshape my destructive ones. So I can use my own resources. I've got those resources, and those resources can also then come from others to make up for ones that I don't have. So none of us have every trait, and none of us are all productive in our traits. My husband will tell me that my stubborn trait can really work against things, and then when it comes to starting a new organization or developing a clinic, it was that stubborn trait that made that happen.
Exactly. Just the same way that like perseverance and that drive for achievement, right? If you put it towards restricting or weight loss, can take somebody really far. But if we funnel it towards, like you said, developing a new treatment, excelling at a job or an area of study, all of a sudden we wind up with like this extraordinary person who's achieved so much in a very, very helpful area or field.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I was working with a heart surgeon who had developed anorexia, and she said, what do I need to do to get out, just get through this? And, her organization, her attention to detail, her ability to organize was incredible. She had all these traits that were honed in, but the avoidant to eating, she was used to standing 14 hours and working on making a heart better and stronger, and was becoming weaker in her own life. And only when she began to realize, all right, I can eat this much at this point and do it in the following way, then she knew in her own way how to take her own medicine, her food, and take that medicine and take it in the doses that she needed so that she could then focus on what she wanted to focus on. And it was a joy to work myself out of a job because she learned what she needed to do. She will never be Miss Congeniality. She was very hard to work with. And she would say, well, I don't have to talk to my patients. They're all sound asleep when I'm working on them. But the point is, she was so technically incredible. So she used her traits in a fantastic productive way and then learned how to stay strong as she needed to do physically.
I want to talk now about one of the things that I think is just that one of the things personally that I really enjoy about TBTS, and that has made a big difference in the way, is really kind of one of the ways it makes it, the way it's made a difference in the way I talk to my patients and families about their eating disorders. And I think that's one of the really unique things about your treatment. I mean, I've trained therapists, I've trained medical residents, and like I always assign medical residents readings of yours to read, to learn about this different perspective on eating disorders. And they always walk away saying it was like one of the single most influential things they've read that really changed the way they thought about eating disorders. So I think you have this beautiful gift of how to speak to patients and their supports to understand this disorder in a different way. And one of the ways you do that is through these experiential exercises and metaphors. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about your use of those tools in this treatment, because I think that's really what makes it so different from many things that are out there right now.
Mm-hmm. Sure. The more I was working with Walt, Christina, and Stephanie, and realizing the details of the brain, and the more I began to realize how the brain takes anything new and works from the bottom up. It's bottoms up for the brain. And that means it starts from coordination and movement of in the cerebellum on into the midbrain of refined movements on into the motor cortex. So as Walt said, the brain organizes itself through movement. And when I began to realize if that's how the brain learns and organizes itself, then I need to make movement happen in the treatment. So I decided if I'm going to do it, let's make it fun and let's make it simple. So I began to take different children's games, whether it was the telephone game or whether it was Red Rover, or different games, and began to make the activity of those games parallel to what was going on in the brain so that the clients and their supports could understand it better. And so the very first one I developed, thanks to the lawn furniture, was what I called the brain wave. And the brain wave was the key areas of the brain. And what we did is we pass around a banana as if every time somebody, each area of the brain was to say their part. If you didn't have an eating disorder, how would the insula respond? If you didn't have an eating disorder, how would the nucleus accumbens respond? And so everyone's learning about their different parts of the brain as they're taking on their parts. And then when they pass the banana around, they're saying their response, like, I'm hungry. That tasted good. Oh, that was nice. Let's add some chocolate chips or whatever. And I'm thinking, let's take in another bite. So I've just decided, and I look okay. But when the circuits for anorexia show through, those very networks have a different message. And so the clients, as I was testing it out with them, I'd say, now pass the banana, but this is the message because you're not only to say it, but whisper it because you're under firing. And I want you in your thoughts to shout it because you're over firing. And so when we passed the banana and everybody was saying their parts and whispering, and we stopped and they just looked at me and said, Dr. Hill, you've summed it up. You've summed it up. Now let's bring in our husbands, let's bring our spouses, our parents, let's bring them all in, and they have to do this brainwave so they know. And so the brainwave became the first. And what was amazing to me is to see the fathers, the husbands, the spouses, the boyfriends, the partners look at the clients and go, it isn't that bad. And they go, it's exactly what it is. And then to see them begin to weep and say, I had no idea. And then we began to reenact and started working on ways that were interactive and playful for them to figure out, like the landmine, to be able to, how do I maneuver around the mines, which are the binging and the purging. The mines are the symptoms. And if you hit that mine, then you have to go backwards, the way we are going backwards in our life. But how do you get through those landmines? And over, I've done it probably 100 times now with the landmine, and every client ends up saying the same thing. I need help. I need support. And hence, temperament-based therapy is one thing, but you need support. And that support is the same, but it's not just offered in a generic way. The client actually defines what they need to get through. I want you to tell me, or I want you to guide me. Or as one woman said to her husband, I brought you here because I wanted you to understand what was going on, but I'm now realizing I can't get through this without your help. And she goes, I'm beginning to realize I'm so ill. I need a lot of your help. I need you to carry me across right now. And he picked her up and carried her across all the landmines. And he said, if that's what it takes, then that's what we're doing. And so he literally learned with the dietitian what kind of meal she needed, and they worked through it. And I saw her 3 months later, and she was with her children, with her husband, standing proudly and strong. And we all wept together.
Wow, it's beautiful. I mean, that's like when you watch this treatment in action, I think that's just one of the really beautiful outcomes of it, is seeing the understanding, those dots beginning to be connected in the eyes of the supports, the family members.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think I have a lawnmower going on in the back of my right now, but I wanted to bring that around then back to family-based therapy, because that's what we do at Equip. We do family-based therapy. And I think there's a really beautiful partnership that can happen between temperament-based treatment and family therapy. And it really is through, I think, that ability of family members to develop a better understanding of what is going on in the brain of their loved one, and to help them see why their kids need their help, right?
Yes.
So it's like, if we got fully grown adults who are like, I can't do this alone. Like, I need you to help me with this. Like, our kids and our teens who have anorexia also need this too. And I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit more about, how TBTS and FBT could work together, or how you see them working together as part of treatment.
And I really commend the work of Stephanie Natz-Peck in bringing those two and merging those two aspects and under that vision of Walt K. And that is taking traditional family therapy developed by LaGrange and Locke, and moving that forward into an experience where the experiential activities help can help the adolescents and their families begin to understand what's going on. And then the adolescents are able to say, well, I was just so upset with myself. I thought I should be able to do it all. So realizing what their traits are and identifying their traits, understanding what isn't firing as strong as it needs to, and why, therefore, they're triggered to do this. Then in knowing why, then the blame gets to then be shed, and you shed the blame and then just get down and start working. And the interactive activities can get integrated into the family-based therapy, because they are the physical way first for the client to work through the game, and then they can turn around and say, this is how I got through it. What did it take? Which traits did I use? What actions did I use? Because those are my solutions that I just used to win this game. Now I can use them to win my strength back. And so temperament-based therapy gets to enhance and bring those roots into the picture of FBT. And it takes where you've got the family already, and that's the core of support. But then the adolescent may say, well, I want my boyfriend to come, and I want, so support becomes a much bigger umbrella, and family fits within that concept of support.
I love that. That's what we like to say here at Equip, right? That we want you to bring your village. Eating disorder treatment takes a village, and we want you to bring your village, right? Whatever that means to you.
Yes.
You know, it doesn't have to be just your parents. It can be relatives. It can be friends. It can be, you know, whoever it needs to be, but it takes a village. So it reminds me a lot of that.
It does, Jessie.
So we're running towards the tail end of our time, and I would love if you could maybe leave us with some final thoughts or advice for, you know, we've got a lot of supports listening in here today, and I'm wondering if there's just any final piece of advice that you would leave to the family members, the friends, the loved ones that are listening in right now. You know, what would you want them to take away from this conversation today, or from the experience that, you know, you have in working in this field?
Well, a couple of messages. And what has surprised me, we wrote this book, Temperament Based Therapy with Support for Anorexia. We wrote it for the clinicians because we realize now that we've developed the treatment, we've been testing it, we need to now train others. But what we're finding is we're getting feedback that a lot of support people are getting the book to understand it, and that it's they're taking the bits and the chapters that that they're reading. So what we're finding is, in taking this book, I'm not sure if you can see that, but
Maybe bring it just a little closer. Yeah, it's got this. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, and
we'll I think we've got a picture of it linked on our
okay. And I think the core of the book is the very last chapter, and it comes down to one sentence, because when we wrote this book, we wanted to bring it to the bottom line points, whether it was the treatment providers learning it to treat it, to use it in their treatment, or the family members learning about it. But it's treat the traits to manage our symptoms with supports for clients of all ages. That is the literal full chapter. That is one sentence, one chapter of the book, but the shortest chapter probably ever. But the baseline is that the book can become, for the support people, a resource to be able to utilize. And then the TBTS Training Institute, as we are training clinicians, we're listing those TBTS trained clinicians on the website, so families and supports can go there and say, all right, if I live here, I could be drawing upon this clinician in the state to be able to enhance our treatment in TBTS.
Oh, wonderful.
So it's literally the training institute opened the day that the book came out in April. And so I thank Equip for being so on top of things. Equip has just moved into the model form of outpatient therapy, which I think everything you guys are doing, you're doing in spades. It's just wonderful. And so thank you for bringing me on and letting me be a voice for my co-authors, and to be able to talk about the book so that both treatment providers and support people know that it's there and know that we're getting to the bottom of things by looking at temperament.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Laura. It means a lot. You are someone who I respect and admire so much in this field, and I've learned so much from you. But it's what you guys have done is fantastic. It's, like I said, it's really wonderful to see this very triumphant capstone to all the years of work you and Stefan, Christina have all put into this. So I'm so happy to kind of lift you guys up and celebrate this book today and this accomplishment, and let everybody know about this really, truly innovative, like wonderful way of understanding eating disorders and leveraging those traits and those strengths to make treatment work better for our patients. Yeah.
Beautifully said, Jessie. Beautifully said.
Well, thank you to everyone else for joining us today. We're so happy you logged in and tuned in to see us live with Dr. Hill. Encourage you to check out the TBTS website and the book, which is available on Amazon. And thank you again, Dr. Hill, for joining us.
It has been my pleasure. Thank you.